everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree, and today we're about to do another discussion video. If you're new here, you might as well sit back, relax, grab a warm beverage, and hopefully you'll stay for the ride. Today I'm actually drinking some Red Rose caramel apple pie tea. I figured it's right around the holidays, and that would be a perfect kind of cozy tea to, settle up in and join for this discussion. So as always with my discussion videos, they're a little bit more relaxed and I typically don't script them. And hopefully this will be a little bit of a shorter one because I really just want to open this up to talk with you guys today and get your opinions on things. The last time I did this, I talked about the psychology of age categorization in novels, and a lot of people seem to like that, especially bringing my psychology background into that seemed to go over very well. So today we're going to do something kind of similar, and we're going to talk about YA vampires and if they are developmentally accurate. So it kind of seems maybe like this is a weird topic. The reason I actually decided to bring it up was because I was listening to the final Mortal Instruments book, The City of Heavenly Fire by Cassandra Clare, and in that book there are a few young vampires. And during my time, listening and kind of sitting with the knowledge of like who these vampires were, I kind of started to think about, what would happen if we took real life development and put them onto these vampires? Because our brains and our development as human beings take quite a few years to fully process. And if we're thinking about vampires, if they stop aging at a certain time, do they actually fully develop as human beings? So we see this a lot in young adult literature where you have, Twilight was a big one. You had Edward, who is this very smart, sexy, I think he was supposed to be 18-year-old. He's 17 or 18. Like, he's very young. In the Mortal Instruments, we have two boy vampires who are, I believe, about 16. And there's also mention of like a 12-year-old vampire. And then there's other books, of course, too. And this kind of, different books have different takes on things. And certain books are definitely going to play into more humanizing vampires. Like I think of Vampire Academy, and there's very specific reasons for how vampires age and develop. So some of those, probably the authors typically will take liberty in describing how their vampires are made, but not every book. And the reason I brought up the Mortal Instruments is because I felt that there was no explanation for how vampires lived their lives. So let me take a second to break down how our brains and bodies develop in a psychology lens. So typically when we are born, and you think about it at the most basic level, we have very, very minimal brain functions, and we have to learn and develop those functions in order to kind of move to the next level. When we're born, we have pretty much just our instincts. And then, we start to walk and talk and learn small things. Those small things will eventually lead way to learning bigger things. So, we learn how to crawl, then we learn how to walk, then we learn how to run, and then we start to be able to move our bodies in all these different ways. We start, doing small hand gestures, from waving to grasping things to fine motor skills such as writing. And all of this stuff is like how your bottom of your brain develops. And then eventually we start getting into more complex functions, such as critical thinking skills and, being able to learn right from wrong, understanding, how things might impact your future, all of those things. So typically when we're thinking about our brains grow from the back forward. So all of our like motor skills and everything are typically in the back of our brain. So obviously, when I say this, like obviously our brain isn't growing in pieces. We'll have a full-size brain, but what strengthens and develops is by those pieces. So typically what we see is the last thing that develops is our prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of our brain, and that leads to all of those critical thinking skills, hindsight, foresight, things that are going to impact us in the long term. We also have, memory functioning, cognitive abilities. Our brains are a huge part of how we work as human beings, and there's a lot of complexities that are involved with our brains. So when you think about it, if we're looking at vampires, right? So we'll go back to the vampire parts of things. Vampires if they actually stop aging, then in theory, everything about us stops aging too. The biggest thing that people focus on is our bodies, right? If we're turned into a vampire at the age of 6, we are forever 6 years old. So does that actually mean that our brains are also 6 years old? In the Mortal Instruments, this is what really started getting me to think about this, is because the 12-year-old girl that they have in the Mortal Instruments, who was unwillingly turned at a very young age, is acting like a typical 12-year-old. You know, she has a bit of power. She just, she's very impulsive. We just do what we want. We want everything to be fun. The spotlight is all on us. That is pretty common when you're young, from 12 to 18 even. A lot of what we learn as kids is, we're starting to develop those skills to understand that we can't always be impulsive, that we have to think through our actions. But at 12 years old, we don't do that. So I would be curious because, this character isn't in the book very long. And I was wondering, if we started to follow her throughout her entire vampire lifespan, would we see that this now 12-year-old girl who has a brain of a 12-year-old, could she continue to grow, and would her brain essentially grow then? Because having a 12-year-old around for a vampire forever is probably a nightmare for a lot of people, because she's never going to be able to understand, if we're taking this at face value, that I can't just always have my way, because my brain isn't developed enough to actually understand that. It also kind of brings in questions when we look at other vampires, like Raphael in the Mortal Instruments, Edward Cullen in Twilight, even like Damon and Stefan from the Vampire Diaries. They're all teenagers, and if we're looking at teenagers, yes, they're a little bit higher. But if you didn't know this, our brains actually don't fully develop and fully have all the capabilities that we should have until about the age of 26 years old. So even at 18, you still have 8 more years of brain development until you can fully say that, yes, my brain capacity should all be there. So if we're looking at 18-year-olds, and Edward is a huge one for this, we walk into Twilight and he has all of these talents and skills. He's learned so much information, and then he also acts like he is older than his age. So I think at 18, there's this kind of weird complexity of, some 18-year-olds do have that ability because they're naturally smart. So I wonder if you would take the context of that and say, is it because he's just naturally gifted that he has been able to learn all of these skills and retain them, and also kind of act a little bit older than his age? Or are we saying that, is there some form of magic involved when you stop becoming older, that the rest of your body continues to function as normal? Is there a magic for vampire brains that they are able to keep expanding and actually growing? Because if we're looking at it as a biological standard, your brain needs blood to grow and function. And if they're not having that blood flow because they're dead, how does this actually work? I just thought this was really interesting because I think so many people, vampires are very romanticized, and I absolutely love vampires. They're one of my favorite magical creatures. But when we take off all the magic part of it, they really don't make sense. And really what doesn't make sense is how the vampires are portrayed, because they're always these very smart, brooding, typically, male vampires when we see them in books. And even the females, they always act so much older than their age. When I look at something like True Blood, and I've watched the show, I started kind of reading some of the books, but there were a lot of, obviously the whole True Blood show is about vampires. And for me, that kind of makes more sense of how they are, developing, because a lot of them are adults, and it is forbidden to turn kids, I believe, in the True Blood series. It's been a while since I've watched the show, and I only just started reading the book, so I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure it's forbidden to turn kids. Maybe I'm mixing up Twilight. I don't know. Anywho, when we're watching True Blood, there's all these adult vampires. So all of their actions and their motivations kind of make sense because they're fully grown adults. We had the one character in the show who ended up being turned, I believe, at 17. And she does act kind of, impulsive and irrational at times because she is a kid, and it makes really good sense. Throughout the show, she kind of grows up a little bit, but I also think, again, you kind of told that line of older teenagers do have some capabilities to think through, and they have some of those critical thinking skills. It's not always going to be 100% for them, but really no one is. So, thinking about it, right? A lot of times our brain development slows down as adults. because at 26, when most of our brain functioning is already there. But I would say, you know, really like that good pop, like 21, 22 is like when like the majority of it ends. So at 17, 18, you know, you still have room for error. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm wondering if we continue to follow like a vampire actually throughout the hundreds of years, would they still have those traits of teenagers? I mean, in theory, it sounds like it, right? Or, you know, would you be in the camp? You know, my friend actually brought up a good point of, you know, maybe there is some magic laced in it and they have these weird abilities. Because you think about a lot of vampires in novels, they tend to have like super speed, they are very strong, so they have these other developments. So maybe it makes sense that their brains will be able to have a higher functioning that us mere mortals do not. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on, you know, vampires. I might be more in the camp of that there is more magic involved, you know, than meets the eye. But I'm just curious on what your take is on things. You know, do you think that they're just, you know, it really would make no sense and we're wasting our time trying to think about this because it's too complex? Do you think there is some magic involved where, you know, if we have all these other super abilities, it makes sense that our brains would also kind of form a new superpower? Or do you think, you know, if an author was actually writing a whole lifetime book on a vampire, that they would actually make it more developmentally appropriate and say that, yeah, there's a lot of things that they learned in their timeline, but they're still kids at heart and they're not actually going to ever grow up because they are stuck in that age forever. Let me know your thoughts down below. I think I kept this video pretty short and sweet and to the point, but it was just kind of an interesting topic that I wanted to talk about, and I would love to know your opinions down below. If you like these discussion videos, please consider giving this a thumbs up because that would really help my channel grow, and I would love to be able to do these on larger scales and have larger discussions with more people, of course. But as always, you know, thank you for sticking around and watching me and following me, and as always, have a wonderful time. Bye.